Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. And have we got a treat for you today? I say that a lot, and it's always true. We have Cate Tumman. Welcome to the show, Cate.
Hi.
So I just feel that I'm building it up, aren't I? I'm a bit Graham Norton. Graham Norton is a chat show here in the UK, and it's all built up, but it's built up for you, Cate, today. So, Cate, listeners, Cate is an adoptive mum. And she also runs a school where all the pupils, all the kids at the school have experienced early life trauma, and the core of the kids in her school are adopted. And we're trying to think of a different approach for the podcast today to focus in on something that Cate said to me about what the parents of her kids say to her when no one else is listening, right? So when they're at breaking point, and that was the phrase that Cate came up with. Cate came up with. So I thought, well, what about doing an episode that is all about helping adoptive parents who are at breaking point? So yeah, what do you see, Cate, with those that's going on for those parents at breaking point?
Yes, I think the biggest and most common theme is that it's that lack of support, and where do I turn and who do I go to? And I think with the best will in the world, and there's been lots of podcasts about support and what is out there for adoptive parents, but the reality is that majority of parents, adoptive and non-adoptive, do not know where to go to get the right support at the right time. So we get to that point where we become very insular, because often it's about shame for us as parents as well, and not wanting to admit that it's not going as perfectly as we wanted it to go. So we get to the point where, do I turn to people? Do I ask professionals for help? Is it okay to acknowledge that my children aren't as wonderful as I thought they might be, and love's not quite enough? And then when I do get to that point that I need some help, where do I go for that help? And parents come, and by the time they do get to that point that they've just got to ask for somebody else, they get to that point where they go, I wish I could give them back. And that's so heartbreaking to hear. And for me, my first response, and obviously they will often come to me because they know I know both sides of that coin, because I'm an adoptive parent as well as being that professional, is, if you'd have given birth, would you be saying, I wish I could put my child into care? And obviously, no, they wouldn't be saying that. And it's just that at that point, they are at breaking point, and they have no other way to turn than, I've made a really bad decision here. And they obviously haven't. It's just that, they are in that block care. They've got exhaustion. They're just totally at their wits' end.
Yeah. And are they there's so much there. There's so much there. In that point though, like when I'm facing a challenge of that magnitude, I would guess that I would look outside me, because I'm not seeing my internal resources at all.
No, absolutely.
So going insular, is that what you meant by going insular? You're kind of like you're going in on yourself. I don't know whether I'm making.
So it's almost like a stage thing that happens, is that when things start to go wrong first, it's almost a human nature thing that we don't talk to people, because it's that shame that makes us go, no, I can do this, I can manage this. I've been told all these things during my my adoption preparation courses, etc. I can do this. And you don't want to tell anybody else, because you don't want people to think you failed, because as humans we don't like to fail. So it is that's what I was thinking about becoming insular, is that you almost close your door in the early stages, when actually the early stages is the best time to get that help. So then you get the stage where actually you've done so much of that yourself, you then become exhausted as the parent carer, and then you then get blocked care where you just can't see what the right way is, or you make some decisions that actually impact more negatively on what's happening, but you can't see that that's what's happening. So it is such a vicious circle going around and around. So yeah, so it's, you know, that knowing when's the right time to ask for help and when is the right time to say, no, actually I can do this.
Yeah. So it's almost like knowing that there is that process frees us.
Yes.
It's like and I'm thinking of that the Kubler-Ross curve, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross,
Yeah.
the grief curve, like kind of knowing that you're going to go through the phrases, going through the phases. She doesn't say how long you have to stay in each phase, right? You know, you can flip, you can go, we can be stuck in one phase for 3 years or 1 minute, right? So I still miss my best mate Matty, who died like 22 years ago, 22 and a half years.
Yeah.
I still miss him, right? So it seems that there is that you're alluding to a process, and you were alluding to a process before we started recording, you know, like stuff that's going on with you.
Absolutely.
And so knowing that there's a process, know that we're going to come, you know, and the hope that we're going to come out of the process.
Yeah.
Is for me where the, you know, we can see the light at the end of the tunnel.
And that acknowledgement that there is a process, and there'll be things that trigger us to go back in that process. And there'll be times and there are things that we'll feel like we've come out of that process, but there'll be something that just hits that button and we go backwards in that process. And that's okay. It's okay for that to happen, because next time we'll come out of that slightly quicker, because we know what the stages are and how we'll feel during those stages. And each and every time, like you talking about your friend, it's been a lot of years, and now you know what that feeling feels like, and you can manage that better within yourself. And that's exactly the same being a parent to an adopted child, because we know how those triggers are, and we learn how that makes us feel as parents, because ultimately it does.
It's funny because I'm painting this once and done. I'm painting this once and done, gentle flow through the process. And as soon as you say that, I think, as soon as you said that, we go back and forth. It's just like, yeah, that's the truth. That's the truth of it.
Yeah.
And it's something that I'm kind of learning at the moment, is the difference between what we think is learning and what we think learning is and what it is in reality.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think, for me, the metaphor that came to this, the learning that came to this, was the learning to ride a bike, right? So you don't forget it.
No.
Right? And that's how we think. We know. Once we know that 2 times 2 is 4, then we know that, and it's never going to go away from us. Once we've learned to ride a bike, it's with us forever. But this sort of stuff, this deeper stuff, where we have moments of complete meltdown and then moments of clarity and moments of hope, that isn't a once and done thing. It's flipping back, and I thought I'd got that, but I clearly haven't, because I oversimplified it into this nice gentle process. Lights at the end of the tunnel, listeners. Simon's telling you that the grass is going to be greener on the other side. Well, the grass does get greener on the other side, and then it goes back to a bit of yellow, scrubby, horrible, knackered stuff when, like, the sun's been on it for 3 months and we haven't had any rain.
I like to think of it more like the growth of a tree, in that, you know, every year our trees grow and they have these beautiful blossoms of blossom going on, and our blossom drops, and that's a little thing that happens. But behind that, there's some beautiful green leaves. And then every autumn, our leaves fall off, and actually we've got some really, you know, not pretty branches there, but actually they're there for a reason. Then we have another new growth, you know, so it's more like a cycle of growth that's going on, rather than kind of a curve that happens, you know. So not necessarily the grass are greener, but the trees' leaves are greener on the other side, and they'll be green for quite a lovely amount of time, but they will drop at some point. And it's knowing that they will come back.
Yeah. Yeah. So when did you first see that, or have you seen that with your own experience of raising your own kids?
Absolutely, and as I said to you when we first spoke, is that, I do this day in, day out in a professional capacity. And naively, I thought, yeah, it'll be fine with my children. But it's very, very different when it's at home, and those triggers. And, I thought, I'll see this coming. But absolutely, I got to a point with my son in particular where his focus is all pointed at me. And I'm thinking, why? And why is not a word I usually use at all. I'm like, where was my wondering? Where was my curiosity? Actually, I needed an answer. And again, that was where I'd got to the point where I was blocked and I just needed an answer. And I had to take myself away from that for a little while and just say to my husband, thankfully, I'm in a lucky position where there is, two of us at home. I was able to say to him, okay, just for a couple of days, I need you to be the front person here so I can just step away and be curious within myself, because answers aren't necessarily what's always going to happen. Curiosity is the key. And every little bit of curiosity and wondering helps us, because our children don't give straight answers. Their behavior doesn't give straight answers. And what we get from them today will not be what we get from tomorrow. And even the beginning and the end of the day is not the same. So wanting a secure set of answers will never work with our children, and children as a whole, really, not even just children with trauma. That's real for all children. So I got to that blocked care with my little boy, where I needed the answers, but I didn't know why I needed the answers. I didn't know what I would do with those answers. I just needed it. So I totally understand where all parents get to when they're so frustrated at everything I'm doing, but I'm doing this and I'm doing this, and it's just not working.
Yeah, yeah. There's a fantastic juxtaposition in what you're talking about from and I've seen it. I think I've seen it in myself with, yeah, because me and my wife haven't got any kids, but I've seen it in business, right? So I had this coach, and she never told me what to do. Like people think of a coach, you think of a football coach, right? That's the most obvious kind, or sports coach, should we say? And the idea is that the coach tells the players what to do. He is prowling up and down the what do they call it, the technical area by the side of the pitch, and they're telling people what to do, and that's what we think of as a coach. My coach in business was exactly the opposite. She never ever told me what to do. She just asked me questions, because she was just asking me questions. But I remember one conversation with her. I said, "Look, I know that you never give me any, you never tell me what to do. You never give me any answers whatsoever. But there's something I'm missing here. So could you just tell me what you think I'm missing?" And she said, what should I do?" And she said, "Make sure that your staff are all trained to do what you want them to do." And I just thought, that is just so pointless. It's such a catch-all saying. I can see now why she never tells people what to do, because that's just like, well, that how long is a piece of string?
Yeah.
How good is good? What training is, like what? No. I mean, it was just a nothing of a thing. But I was desperate. So the juxtaposition that I saw that I heard in what you said was the juxtaposition between desperation. Just tell me what to do. Yeah, I'm listening to a podcast. I'm listening to, and I'm thinking about the listener listening.
Yeah, absolutely.
The listener listening to this. Yes, Simon. Yes, Kate. I say that, but just tell me what to do.
Yeah.
Like, we can't tell you what to do, other than to get curious. Because when I was in that place of desperation, just tell me what to do, the advice that I got was pointless. It was pointless from this one. Now, I achieved a lot of great things with that with that business coach, but it was always prompted by insights that she drew out of me.
Yeah.
And whenever I get anywhere near this subject, I think of the 1 year's Latin that I did with Mrs. Edwards, I think she was called. She was quite a flaky teacher, and we were as 30 lads, 11-year-old lads, we were really bad on her. We saw her weakness, right, and we went for it. But somehow I managed to do okay actually in that 1 year of Latin. I got like 70-odd%. But I gave it up for German, which was far tougher. Anyway, Latin, the word educate comes from, well, have you heard of this? Have you heard this one? Where the word educate, right? It comes from the Latin educare.
Okay.
Right? So an educare means to draw out of people.
Okay. Makes sense.
It does not mean to tell them what to do. It does not mean to stuff information into kids' heads or stuff information into adoptive parents' heads.
Yeah.
Or stuff any information into anyone. It's to draw out. And I obviously I often talk about this, like what draws out the answer from within us is that hook-like thing that's at the end of a question.
Yeah.
A question mark, and that draws stuff
Absolutely.
out of us, and we see what to do. If we're coming from a place of curiosity, so on one hand, you've got this desperation. Just tell me what to do. This is me saying to the business, just tell me what to do. And then her advice didn't work. But most of the time, all the time, she asked me questions, and she drew out my insights.
Yeah.
So desperation or curiosity. If you're coming from desperation, you're going to be short of answers, aren't you? You're not going to come up with answers. You need that kind of perspective. Like you said, you had a couple of days away from being there at the front of the caring parents. Your husband stepped into the room. You got a bit of perspective that allowed you breathing space. That allowed you space for new ideas to come in from a place of curiosity, and definitely not desperation.
Absolutely. And I think during that time when I was thinking about, being curious with myself, and I think the first person I had to be curious with was myself, was why do I need these answers? I wonder what I'm seeking from getting these answers right now. I think in thinking about that, again, it came from a place of caring because I wanted him to be okay. But actually then realizing that the answers wouldn't make that okay, because it's not a magic wand, and I'm not going to be able to heal that trauma overnight. And actually, even if I could, it's not the healing of the trauma, it's actually living with that and moving forward that is the key. It's not about let's have some magic therapy that's going to heal that here and now. It's let's live with that and work with that and learn from that healing, rather than the magic wand, off we go, here it is now. And I think that was kind of the point where I thought, okay, let's work with him and think about how he's feeling and move forward from there.
Yeah. So I heard a podcast this morning, and it was about, I think it was, I'm trying to tune it into our context here today. It was quite counterintuitive, but it sounded a bit like what you said. It's basically accepting what is.
Yeah.
So if we're fighting, then we're not accepting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The bottom line is it all comes back to that PACE model, that actually if we accept it, we're curious with it, and we're empathetic to the way that makes that person feel.
What's the PACE model?
So Dan Hughes is Dr. Dan Hughes is the model of PACE, which stands for play, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. And that's the core ethos to which I set up the school on. It's the core ethos to how I parent my children. So we are very, very playful. We are very accepting of everything that happens. That doesn't mean that we choose to ignore the behaviours that come with that. It means that we accept the behaviours, and then we work with those behaviours to be curious where those behaviours have come from, and actually that if a consequence is required, it's a very natural consequence. So, for example, very extreme, but if a computer gets broken, then we can't use a computer for a while because we don't have one. Whereas, if we break a window, for example, we wouldn't lose a computer because they're not connected. That would make no sense at all. And that also works a lot around that repair and reflection, in that, whatever happens, we accept these things happen. So we always repair from them. Nothing's ever left, so there's none of that kind of shame there.
Yeah.
And that's part of that empathy. So making sure that it is empathy and not sympathy. So we stay with them in their feelings for a while and then work through them, rather than that kind of, being very sympathetic with that feeling. And empathy and sympathy are it's quite a trick to get to understand the difference between empathy and sympathy, because as humans we go instinctively to sympathy, whereas actually empathy is genuinely walking in that person's shoes for a while and understanding how that might feel.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to take you back to the. I was gonna go into kind of parenting stuff there actually. I started, so I finished. So I'll just go into that. So, when you say about curiosity, are you saying really that sometimes you'll ask? I got the feeling that that's what you do with your kids. You point them upstream, and so, oh, I wonder why you did that.
Absolutely. Wonder is a word we use in our house all the time. To the point where my little girl, who is 10, will now say, Mum, I know you're going to start wondering about this now, which is quite funny to hear her saying. But yeah, absolutely. We talk about that all the time and say, I wonder why that happened, or I wonder what you were thinking just then. So just trying to help them to understand what was going on for them at that time. Rather than, I think again, that natural thing was go, why did that happen? Give me an answer. And, but it's not necessarily about giving an answer. Something me and my husband do quite a lot, which comes from the dyadic developmental model, which is something I'm trained in, is we will often wonder out loud between each other with the children in the room. So we will kind of have a very wondering conversation, which the children are very good at going, no, or, okay, so you always know, kind of, so we'll have that wondering conversation between the two of us. So we're not actually directing it at the children. So, if something happens where, they've made a poor choice, I will often say to my husband, oh, I'm guessing that say my child's name, I'm guessing he feels really sad right now, and that his tummy might be feeling a little bit icky because he's made a poor choice and he's not sure how to talk to us about it. And then my husband would come back with something like, I think I might feel a bit icky if I'd chosen to do that too. So, but he knows that we're here if he would like to come and talk to us about it, and we could make a choice about what happens next. So we will kind of have that conversation with him in earsight, so that he knows it's a safe space to come and talk to us, and he knows we already know. So he hasn't got to own anything. He hasn't got to come and go, I've done this, because he knows we already know.
Yeah.
So that curiosity is amazing.
It's amazing, yeah. And modeling it, right? Doing it yourself, rather than, because kids, I don't think we can hear that enough. The fact that kids do what we do, not what we say.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, so I'm figuring a couple of rabbit holes that I could go down there. So but I'm not going to go down. I'm going to bring it back to the main idea. So one of the things that you said right at the top of the conversation is that support thing.
Yeah.
And going outside for external support. And the idea that flashed into my head then was a conversation that I had with a a researcher in trauma, and I asked her this question. I'd heard something. I'd heard a podcast that said that 10. This is so a lot of trauma research and PTSD research comes from America and military, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, there are some people here. I see a lot of adoptees actually referring to a guy called a video by a guy called Paul Sunderland, and in which he kind of equates adoption trauma with PTSD, right?
Yeah.
And it's very plausible, but not very hopeful. So nobody talks about post-traumatic growth is the main issue here. But before I get onto that, according to whose statistics you listen to, only 10 to 20% of people that go through traumatic stress events get PTSD, right? So that means that 80 to 90% don't. And obviously we've got to look after the people that have got the PTSD. When I was talking to somebody else about this the other day, they said, well, that they've got PTSD, but they're in denial, and so you can go down a rabbit hole of this. But so I said to this trauma researcher, this like a psychiatrist kind of researcher, and I said, so what's the difference between the difference? So what's the difference between the difference? And she said, well, so the ones that don't get PTSD, she ran off a load of different factors. And I said, that's really interesting, because all the factors that you've described there are external. Yeah, they're not what's going on within the person. It's the support that person gets. I said, so what about the internal stuff?
Yeah.
What about the internal stuff? And she didn't have an answer. And at that point, there's various points where I have I'm not really good with authority. Right? So I've only ever worked with I wasn't good with that authority at school, not at university either. Not a rebel, but not so good. But especially, like, I've only worked with my dad. I didn't do very well working with him. I struggled with some of his stuff. But I've never worked in a big organization. I've never had bureaucracy, and it really doesn't suit me at all. And the other times that I question authority is when somebody that I think should know the answers doesn't have them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going through some stuff, some financial stuff at the moment, and like people that I think should have the answers don't. And I, when a shrink researcher, trauma researcher says has no answers to the internal stuff going on, I'm thinking, you've lost a little bit of I've lost a little bit of my respect for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you can't answer that internal question. So what's your take on this? The internal aspect to coping with a crisis situation when adoption is in danger of breaking down. How do you see the internal stuff?
Well, I think that's where the difficult area lies, isn't it? Because, like I said before, the human nature is that we do internalize a lot of things in the early days, is because, shame does take over, and we don't want to be a failure. And I think that, certainly when I went through the process of adopting, and it's not as in-depth now, It is almost drilled into you that, you know, you must do this and you must do that and you must be prepared, you must be prepared. But nothing can prepare you for when your children arrive, because nobody can write down for you. And the human needs, you know, it's almost like we need to know what's going to happen, but we can't, because the other side of being human is that internal factors, nobody sees that. And until our children feel safe enough to show what's happening, they're not going to show the real side. So everything that you get written down on paper about your children is not the child that you then adopt, because once they're with you and they do feel safe, you're going to see a totally different child to the one that's been in foster care, been in wherever they've been. So there needs to be a process where the parent carers can access support for what's going on for them internally, because they, by adopting, you almost experience trauma yourself, because you internalize everything that your children bring with them. Now there are things out there like the therapeutic adoptive services, but it's knowing what's out there and what can they give you, and then having the courage to hold your hands up and say, do you know what, this is not perfect. I've not adopted this child. I've not, you know, what a lot of people on the outside say, I've not rescued this child from the system and given it love and it's all perfect, it's all rosy. Because that's what a lot of naive people on the outside believe. So that kind of internal model for both, you know, that it's almost kind of a tennis relationship going on there between you and your adoptive child, because you're trying to heal their trauma and be supportive around that, which you sponge into yourself and you become traumatized. And if that is becoming toxic because you're getting blocked care because you're actually not getting that support, we go round and round, and that's when we come to that breaking point of, I just can't do this anymore. And it is, you know, again, it's that self-preservation that we do and just go, hands up, can't do this, I've failed, have them back. And that's where we come to. And it is that's that internal safety model of ourselves as human beings.
Yeah. Where does the courage come from?
You can't be taught that. That's not something you can be taught at all. It's one of those, it's deeper than that. It's your life experiences, it's the support package you've got around it, it's your networking of support. It's somebody on the outside looking in, saying, you need to get somebody to help. So it's key that, you know, you do have other people around you, and it's not just what's going on in your cellular home.
Yeah.
That we don't close those doors, which it's so tempting to do. You know, it's kind of that, you know, your children can be difficult to manage. You know, your children need set routines. You know, your children don't like it if somebody says a certain word. So to protect them, you say, okay, so I won't allow X to look after them, and I won't take them to this place. I won't take them to that birthday party because it's too busy. But by not doing all of those natural things, you then as a parent aren't seeing all those other parents in that natural communicative way that you would if you had a birth child. So in protecting our children, because they need smaller groups of children and they need, you know, familiar people and all of those sort of things, you close those doors without sometimes knowing you've closed those doors.
Yeah. I was a bit lost in thought there with that stuff for a minute, and I was thinking like, you know, where is that courage? Where does it come from, and what helps it? For me, the answer that came to me is that the courage is seen. It's seen. It's something that we see, and the other model that came to mind, because we're actually also talking about resilience here.
Yes, absolutely.
Talking about resilience, and I heard something quite a long time ago, a few years ago now, that really stuck with me. That kind of the conventional model in society, the cultural model, is that resilience is strengthened. Okay, so you've got some stuff going on, and it's sold to us actually by this. This is how resilience training people sell us this problem, right? So you're going through a problem, whatever that problem would be, in your parenting or in your personal life, and you need to be more resilient. You need to come to my resilience gym, and I'm going to strengthen your resilience like I would strengthen your muscles, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why you should come on my resilience training course, because I was like you were. then I discovered the 5 rules, the 5 ways to become more resilient in 30 days. And now I'm packaging that, and I'm going to sell it back to you, and it's going to cost you $9.99. But if you buy today, it's $4.99.
Yeah.
So the idea is that you are weak. I am resilient. Come to me, and I'll train you, and I'll strengthen your resilience. Right. So it seemed like it's a muscle that's strengthened, and but that's not actually the truth.
No.
Resilience is seen. So we come to a crisis, big or small. We have no idea how we're going to get through that crisis, and yet we do.
Yeah.
And then we see how strong we always were, but we hadn't seen it for ourselves. So, like, resilience is an inside job. So culture says it's resilience is strengthened, courage is strengthened.
Yeah.
Whereas actually, resilience and courage are seen. It's back to my Latin again. It's revelation comes from the word revelare, and that means to lay bare. And the metaphor that always comes to mind when I think about this is the statue of David in Florence, is it, by Michelangelo? And Michelangelo is asked by this guy, where did you find David? How did you make David? And Michelangelo said, well, David was always there. I just chipped away stone to reveal David underneath.
Yeah.
So it's a revealing thing, a seeing thing, an insight, something that we see about ourselves, rather than a strengthening thing. And the key difference between the two is that the insight can happen in a minute, right? So if it's like going to the gym, we need to go for 3 times a week for 6 months, and then we're going to see X% growth of our biceps.
Yeah,
we're going to have to wait for it. So anyway, to me, it's a seeing.
And I think that it comes hand in hand with that. When we're at that breaking point, we can't see that any longer, because our self-esteem and our self-worth is so low, we can't see that any longer. And I think that's where it takes that those people that know us well on the outside to go, but remember, look back to you managed this was okay, and we got through this, and just to give you those reminders. And right at that time, you're not going to believe it, and you will argue that pink was purple at that time, but then that just unpicks and opens that door, that when you're back in your own space, it can open up that insight once again to go, do you know what, they were right, I did get through that, and we did manage to do those things. But it takes that, at that breaking point, it just takes that person to put the kettle on, give you a cup of tea, and say, remember, because that's what it's worth. And that's what happens, when right back at the beginning of our talk, when we say, what do I see? I see parents and carers at that point that turn up at school and just need a cup of tea and that reminder to say, you can do this, because you've been doing this for all this time, and today's not that day.
Yeah.
And that's the bottom line of where we get to.
So it's somebody seeing the strength that we've forgotten in ourselves,
Absolutely.
pointing that out to us.
Yeah.
And I love the point. I love the comment that you made about we'll fight it.
Yeah.
And that reminds me of, I think culturally we're not very good at accepting compliments or accepting compliments, whether that's, well, whatever that compliment is about. So, you know, oh, well done. People say this to me, like, they say, oh, well, how many downloads? You know, say, well, how's the podcast doing? I said, well, we're on we've just gone past 30,000 downloads, and it's been going since April last year. And they say, oh, that's great. And I say, yeah, but in my
There's always a but.
there's a but, yeah. But we're talking, the but, and for our American listeners, there's the but. It means that we're talking out of our butt, right? So there's the but with one T and the but with two T's. And I flip it. I say, well, I don't know. I haven't. I've got high expectations. In my old business, I grew an education website, or team, the webmaster and people. It took us 15 years, but we got to 30 million downloads a year, and I've had 30,000 downloads in 18 months. So I don't think I'm doing really that well, you know. And it's like we fight
Yeah, absolutely.
we fight the compliments, and we come back to the compliments and the stuff. So that's me with a compliment that's got nothing to do with adoption, right? But that's just me.
And that's exactly the same. You know, you opened out this podcast saying what an amazing treat it was to have me talking on here, and I'm an adoptive mum, and I'm a head teacher who set up a school for children that deserved it. I'm just me. And you know, I don't, you know, and I'll be honest with you, I often don't tell people I'm a head teacher because I don't aspire to that model of that authority of head teacher. So when I tell people, I say I run a school for children with additional needs, because I don't aspire to that model of suited and booted and strutting my thing up and down a corridor. That's not at all what I'm like. I wear the same uniform as all the rest of the staff wear, with a polo t-shirt and my muddy boots on, out around the farm school. Because actually, you're right, authority. I never did well with authority at school. And that's not the model that I wanted at all, because education's not about authority. It's about opening up those doors and making it accessible, and that's what the importance was. But you know, like you say, compliments is not something we do really well with as a society at all.
So yeah, I started the conversation by talking about a tree, because I think one of my favorite sayings from a mentor I had a few years ago, and he is responsible for why I do this in a roundabout way. He says it's hard to see the picture when we're in the frame.
Yeah.
So why I see you as a tree is because you've got your own lived experience, which you've been generous with in terms of being an adoptive mum. And you've also got the experience of dealing with loads of other adoptive parents, and on an ongoing basis, right? Absolutely. So, and when we have an adoption agency professional on the show, who is perhaps also an adoptive mum or adopted dad, their focus has been the adoption and post-adoption, not so much. So they only see their perspective, and it's quite a short-lived perspective. Whereas the kids coming to your school, they might be there for years. So you see what's going on for the adoptive parents over years.
Yeah.
And you see them at breaking point, and you see them before breaking point, and after they've come through breaking point, it's all been okay, right?
Absolutely.
And that's why I saw you as a treat, because your perspective is way deeper, way more long term than like an exec director of an adoption agency whose focus is quite short term and in the adoption, and they may do some stuff post adoption. This has been one of the perspective shifts that I've seen, right? So I've been thinking, I came into this world of adoption professionally. I started picking up gigs with speaking gigs with adoption agencies. I thought, that's great. I'll be able to share what I've learned as an adoptee who also has 6-7 years experience of helping kids understand their emotions, right? And I'll be able to do the kind of like training in that. And then, so the training gigs, a few of them came, and then there's been negligible training.
Yeah.
And why is that? Well, I thought it was me, right? So I changed my approach in trying to do this stuff. And what I actually discovered, what I had an insight was, actually adoption agencies are about adoption, not post-adoption.
Yep.
So that's a long way of saying that. But if you're looking for support, listener, find somebody that focuses on post-adoption. Because the adoption agencies are not set up for that.
Absolutely not. And and there are a few people, even though my role is as head teacher, but I'll share with you that I had an email just yesterday from a family who were at breaking point and unfortunately did break, and their little one came back into the system, thankfully only for a year. And was able to reconnect with their family, and went back to their family after a year in a children's residential home. And they've emailed me this morning to just keep me updated on what's happening, and let me know that she's just finished her college placement, and she's taken the rest of this year out, and she's applied for a university placement for the start of the year. And what an amazing journey that the family were able to get the support that they needed, and look at themselves as a family and what they could do, and and actually were able to reconnect. And it's such a positive journey, and to be able to hear the positives on the other side is just it's just so valued for me. What more could I ask for?
So yeah, I mean, somebody else was talking that kind of that option. Somebody else talked to me about respite, and you're talking about basically a long respite.
Yeah, right? That's right.
And I'd never even heard of that until now. So it's really those options. It's those options, and people not being able to see it. So did we talk about that thing that was in that article that was in the Sunday Times at the start of the year last time? Did I talk?
We did, yes, yeah.
So listeners, there was a trustee of an adoption organisation here in the UK did an article about the breakdown of her adoption, and it drove me nuts because she'd written this article. She was obviously I've got empathy for her right now. Actually, she was in the art. She was at breaking point. She asked for. She was searching out some therapy in her area, and then she said, and I found out I couldn't get it in my area. And I was expecting her to say, so I moved to a different area, or so I tapped into a different resource. She didn't. She couldn't see that option, and the adoption failed because she was out of options. So you need some options. That's what you need to see. When we're in the dark about something, we need to move into the light where we can see other options.
And it's that knowing how to move into the light and where to go with that. I'll share my experience, just my recent experience. I'm not keen on labels and diagnoses and all those sorts of things unless there is a clear benefit for that. And from although I've known what the need is for my little boy, he now needs that because school are finding things more difficult, and he's finding it more difficult at school. So I went back to our support after adoption local authority team to request a psychological assessment for my little boy. It took me a year to get that agreed, of back and forth, and and that frustrates me on the level that I'm somebody with a lot of knowledge around this, and there are a lot of adopters out there that don't have that knowledge of what to say and how to say that and to fight that corner. So it took me a year. I eventually got that psychological assessment for him. That's come back. We've got the assessment report. Says exactly what I expected it to say. There's no surprises for me in there at all. And now that's where it stops. So it states very clearly what therapy he needs and what support he needs. And then that's now ball back to me to go and try and find that. And this is where the frustration lies, because how does a general parent do that? How do you go and find that support? Where do you go and find that support from? Because that's the difficulty. Without, you need your agency to signpost you. Where do you go for that? How do I access that? Who do I go and access through? Because some's through your GP, some's through private. It's such a minefield.
Yeah. But a year. So this persistence, and we talked about this. You mentioned the determination word before we started the recording. It's bloody minded, just sticking with it, and that's the solution to most stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like sticking, Nike. So just do it. Just do it. No, just do it. But then we make up all these reasons that we can't. Like I had that before the podcast, actually, before I started the podcast. So back in March last year, I was chatting to a marketing mentor of mine, and I was updating on what I was doing, and she said, "Oh, so you're enjoying doing the podcast?" So you said, "Yeah, that's great. Love it. Time to do your own." I said, "Well, no, I've done a podcast training course, and it's too complicated, and no, I can't do it. I haven't got time. It's not." And she said, "Well, just do it, Simon." And I said, "No, I can't. I can't. I don't know how to do the editing." And she just said, "Right, well, you need Simplecast. You need Zoom to have conversations with people. You've got Zoom, Simon, because we're having this conversation on Zoom. So that's the first one. You got one booked in. You need Simplecast, right? It's $15 a month or $16 a month, and you need a Simplecast account, and that will you upload your audios, have your interviews, download the audios, upload them to Simplecast, and it sends it out to the different podcast platforms like iTunes. And you need Canva. So Canva is the little graphics program that you use to create pictures to share on social media. That's all you need. You don't need to do any editing, just do it. And I went, and I still came up with an excuse, right? And
there's always a but.
Yeah, there's always a but. And I said, but, and she said, just do it. And I went, okay, I will. So that's the answer. Is you can't sell a book about persistence, can you? That just says just do it. If the book had just do it on every page, who's going to buy that book? Nobody's going to buy that book. Stick with it. Another book, it said stick with it, stick with it, stick with it. Forget about the buts. Stick with it. Stick with it. It's
you almost need to do a mind map of what your plan is in the middle, all your excuses, and then after every excuse, but just do it, and then we'll be good to go.
Brilliant. So is there a question that I've not asked you that you want me to?
No, I think we could go round and round and cover absolutely everything, because there's so many aspects to this. I think the clear message that I would just like to get over to listeners is, don't give up. Think about the reasons you made that decision in the first place to adopt your amazing children, and remember that self-worth, that you have done this, you do an amazing job, and be curious on that day, why are you feeling that? I wonder why today is that day. Because actually, I mean, my experience is the days when you get there are not the most tricky days. The days before that are usually the worst ones, and it's the day when something quite minor happens. I like to think of myself as being a Coca-Cola bottle, and that if your Coca-Cola bottle's empty because everything's going great, you can fill it up with lots of things. But when your Coca-Cola bottle's quite full and you've reached that small bottleneck at the top, you can put in the smallest little thing and you're going to fizz out the top of that Coca-Cola bottle. So I consider that actually I need to do my things to just empty out my Coca-Cola bottle, and make sure that my bottle is empty enough to manage all those things that come in. So I just think of me as being a bottle, and I need to do my own thing. And you need to have some self-time to be able to manage.
Yeah, fantastic. And have you got a question for me?
I think my one question for you is, throughout these podcasts, has there been anything that's really frustrated you about the answers that adoptive parents have given you? What's
No.
your biggest frustration? Has there been something where people have said to you, for example, I do give up, or I have given up, or that kind of, has there been anything that's really frustrating? I know you've said that about professionals and
nothing from an adoptive parent. No, nothing from an adoptive parent has frustrated me. The article that I related to, that we discussed about this adopted parent who's a trustee of an adoption organisation and who didn't, who couldn't see another way forward. That doesn't frustrate me. My reaction is very judgmental, should we say, on that. Very judgmental. So I don't want to. I don't want to go there because it's not. I don't think it's fair.
And the reason I'm just going to explain for the listeners the reason for my asking that question is I just think it's key to know that actually the people that have these conversations all the time, we're not judgmental and we're not frustrated by anything that adoptive parents do. And that's why my reason for asking you that question, no matter what's said, we're not frustrated by what adoptive parents do. You were judgmental about the fact that she didn't keep going, she didn't just do it. But we're not judgmental about what adoptive parent, the decisions that people make. Actually, we want to be there to support, we want to help them see that there are new green leaves on the other side.
Yeah.
That was my reason for asking that question.
Fantastic. I would say the biggest thing, whatever the opposite of frustration is, the biggest thing, the thing that really makes my heart sing is when the adoptive parent realizes it's about them, not the kid.
Yeah.
The self-awareness thing, because I think that is spot on. And me and my wife haven't got any kids, and I know that our relationship starts with me. Yeah. So it's about changing me, not about changing her. And I don't always remember that clearly, but I know that in my heart of heart. And when parents get that, I had some secondhand stuff actually that I found frustration. So I was talking to a TBRI practitioner who said, parents ring me up and ask me essentially fix my kid. Now, I've never had a conversation like that. with an adoptive parent. But if I had had a conversation that was a bit like that, I guess that would have frustrated me. But I've been fortunate enough that I haven't.
And I suppose I've had a few conversations like that at breaking point. And I've managed that by talking about what can we put in a toolkit to think about fixing. And when you start to open up, and it's a little bit about, then back to that curiosity. I wonder what we could put in a toolkit to start this fixing. Again, it just starts that thinking back and actually, what can I put in a toolkit? And it's just bringing it back to actually, we're there, we're the adults, we're the parents, we're the carers. There's no magic wand that's going to make this okay. And that's not just children that are adopted, that's for every child. They need adults to support them, love them, care for them, and teach them on life's journey.
Yeah, I love that gentle shift, because if somebody said to me, fix my kid, and I said back to them, no, it starts with you, then we'd be into an argument, wouldn't we?
Absolutely.
I love the gentle transition to what you said. I think that's brilliant and genius, and that's the genius like that you get from all those conversations with adopted parents. And going back to Dan Hughes, his the E of his PACE model, the empathy thing. You don't. We don't. But there's that fine line between. So a coaching model is about empathy and then moving forward rather than just validation. Because validation just sends us further down the hole, and that's what I see a lot of within adoptees. They'll get together and send each other further down the hole. And they validate one another. And if you do anything that is curious, like asking a curious question, then they shut you straight down because you're saying, no, you're invalidating my feelings. This is what happens on Facebook, and that's nowhere to go. So thank you very much. We'll put a link through to the school, so people can find out more about that. And brilliant. Thanks so much, Kate. It's been.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, listeners. We'll speak to you very soon. Cheers. Bye bye.